We lose at least 100,000 Americans to this war every year.
Was that long ago?
If you thought about cost per kill, it's pretty cheap. It disintegrates.
Wow. So
That's not what Elon did. He vertically integrated. He builds the whole rocket engine himself.
is there anybody that's making defense tech or opium war? Can you go into that?
Yeah. So we had the opium war where really the Chinese felt like a lot of drugs were flooding into China. The reverse opium war is the Chinese are funding and enabling fentanyl precursors to be shipped to Mexico to then be funneled into our country. We lose at least 100,000 Americans to this war every year. It is an ungodly casualty rate. And it's not just happening on its own. And if we were losing even a fraction of this number of people to kinetic attacks, we would have a radically different posture to what's happening here. I think some of this is our own conflicted and I think retrograde feelings of, is it the fault of the person who's using the drug? But you have to really step back and recognize the environment that's what is enabling all of this to happen. It's a tragedy at a big scale. And I think obviously the cartels bear a lot of responsibility, but these precursors are coming from somewhere. And the Chinese have so much control over their economy. If they didn't want it to go, it wouldn't go. And I think they view it as part of their national interest to undermine us from the inside.
Wow. So how long ago was the opium war?
Was that the 1800s?
Was that long ago?
Yeah.
And why were we doing it?
It was expansion. It was economic expansion where people were trying to trade with China at the time. You had the collapse of the historic dynasty, the beginning of the century of humiliation, and it was kind of an outgrowth of unbridled economic expansion. There was a market for it. I think it was largely the British that were supplying it. Maybe it was coming up from Afghanistan, as I recall. And it undermined the Chinese people. You had lots of people who were addicted to opium. It undermined their productivity. And I think that's why it's the reverse opium war.
And we were pushing that.
I think largely the British, but I think we were a minor part of it.
Why? Why were we pushing it?
I don't know.
And so this long later, I mean, this is because of that.
Yeah. Well, is it because of that, or I think more it is an asymmetric way of weakening us. It's an asymmetric way of doing it. It's pretty cheap if you think about if you thought about cost per kill. It's pretty cheap. It disintegrates society. It weakens families. It causes a lot of trauma. It weakens our will. It distracts us from doing the things we need to do around our economic prosperity, around reindustrialization, around taking them seriously as a threat.
One other thing I want to get to before we go into the future of warfare is we were talking about Operation Paperclip later. And so just downstairs, I just had a thought. I mean, should we be doing that today?
We should. I've been trying to socialize this idea, and I don't know if we're at a point of having the political will. Operation Paperclip 2 should really be around reindustrialization. If you think about German Mittelstand companies, that's like these middle tier, high skilled manufacturing companies. I think they're kind of somewhat lost in Germany today. If you look at what happened in Germany, the big companies sold out the German economy to the Chinese. BASF, big chemical company, most of their factories now are in China, not in Germany. Volkswagen and the investments they've made in China. But that was never the perspective of the middle tier German manufacturer. Most of these companies are family owned. They're hundreds of years old and been in the family consistently. They're high skilled. It's not commodity stuff, high art, high trade. Maybe some of them want to move their manufacturing to America. Maybe we should enable that. Maybe there are, we should be basically, if you generalize this concept, you have entrepreneurs, highly skilled, who make things that are not commodity, hard to make anywhere in the world, let alone here. And we can marry them up with the deepest, richest capital markets in the world, which exist in America. How do we help them build their business, create employment, and drive our national security by reindustrializing America?
Damn. I mean, who else should we be targeting other than is there anybody that's making defense tech or anything that we should be snagging up and bringing here?
I would, you'd have to heavily vet them, but I think we should be thinking pretty seriously about disaffected Chinese that we can be pulling over. You get a little twofer for that, weakening them and strengthening us. And then the surrounding areas like Taiwanese entrepreneurs, Japanese entrepreneurs, manufacturers, really. And then you have a belt of these folks in Europe, some in France, a lot in Germany, maybe even a few of them a little bit in Eastern Europe. But we should be taking the cream of the crop who are doing these things in new and novel ways and bringing them here, while the main effort should be investing in the founders who are here in the area around El Segundo, where we have this revival of American manufacturing happening, doing it in different ways. And I think it's worth double clicking into that because, the conventional view of efficient manufacturing is that you have this very distributed supply chain. Everyone makes one part and these supply chains go really deep. But what that's done is it's hollowed out the knowledge from the buyer. So if you're at the top of the stack and you're building jet engines, you don't even understand your supply chain. You just think you're buying something. We've kind of retarded your mind in terms of how deeply you understand the product that you're building. You're just ordering parts and essentially assembling them. That's not what Elon did. He vertically integrated. He builds the whole rocket engine himself. And that means he can control and reduce the number of parts. He can say, hey, these 3 parts should be combined because it'll be more efficient. And that's how you get the asymmetric advantage and the leaps, the ability to innovate on these things. And so that's where I say it's not that we're not good at making things in this country. It's that the old way of doing it is not competitive anymore. We need this new way, much more vertically integrated, much more creative. His R&D engineers at SpaceX sit on the factory floor of assembly. Usually these are thought of as 2 totally different things. You have people who design the parts. You have people who assemble the parts. But actually, if the engineers can see what's happening in assembly that's causing it to be slow, what's causing quality issues, it might change how you design the parts. And so how are they going to observe that if they're not physically sitting together? It sounds so simple, but it speaks to the cultural thing, and it's resonant with forward deployed engineering, right? So how do we leverage this uniquely American perspective on doing these things to just get back to being the best in the world at doing it again?
And you're starting this conversation. How are you doing that?
Well, I'm talking to colleagues in the national security community about it to see if there's a way of doing it. I'm also trying to just do it through the front door. Are there companies in particular where we can provide capital to reinvigorate it? The easy place to start is in the US. You have a lot of these mid-tier suppliers. They are actually family owned. The next generation maybe doesn't want to continue the business because the government has been such a promiscuous buyer, so unpredictable in demand. They haven't had the economic reason to invest in capitalizing their facilities to do much more. There have been boom and bust cycles around this. But if you can buy a bunch of these up and aggregate scale, particularly in a thematic line where it's like, actually these 3 parts are related and I could actually make it one part and I could deliver the part more cheaply, generate more value. He's like, how do you get the math to work out? But I think we could just start here and start filling in the holes that we have with capabilities and technologies from allies.
Yeah, there was a lot of was it the H-1B visas? A lot of blowback. That was something I was scratching my head on for a long time, going like, I don't see what the problem is if we take the world's best and consolidate them here in our country. And to be honest, you're an example of that.
I'll take both sides of that because I feel like I really do. I have a view of it, which is few people should argue with this idea of taking the world's best. But so much of the H-1B program has also been abused to take.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.